All right, everyone, welcome back to the Prism Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. And if you're watching on YouTube, hello. Today we have an episode with two truly brilliant minds. We have Mathew and Matt from a company called Pathy. Okay. Mathew is the co founder of Pathy, while Matt is the head of experience with Pathy. And Pathy is a one on one support community that's dedicated to really holding you accountable, especially, solo entrepreneurs, people looking for mentorship, and really just someone to talk to achieve your goals in your life, while focusing on your mindset and your well-being. And when I heard about this company, what came into my head was like, I wish I would have had this when I was getting started in entrepreneurship. And what's so special about this company is, instead of it being like therapy that's, really hard to attain if you don't have the financial means, this is something that every single one of you can set aside a little bit of money each month, to be able to work with a specialist that is trained and certified to support you in whatever you may be going through, whether it be mindset challenges, loneliness in your business, life stuff, right? And they work with people called reflectors. So if you're a part of this, you get assigned to somebody who's a reflector, and they're going to be there not to tell you what to do, but to really empower you to step into your truest and most authentic self and create the results in your life that you're looking for. So I'm so excited for you guys to tune into this episode. Without further ado, we have Mathew and Matt.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. And I am very eager and excited to have two really incredible men with me today, Mathew and Matt, which could get a little confusing. So if it gets a little confusing with the two Matts and Matthews, I just actually got the opportunity to meet you, Matt, a couple weeks ago, and had an amazing conversation with you. And obviously, Mathew, just meeting you a few minutes ago. What I can really say is that this conversation is going to be such a different conversation than I have with especially most men, because both of you are so, from what I can tell, committed to really operating from a healthy masculine place and a very heart-centered place. And I've already learned, just by the way that you guys open meetings and the way that you speak and the intentionality behind what you do, I just appreciate both of your spirits so much. So thank you guys for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I had a ton of fun in the podcast interview that we did just last week when you joined our podcast, and really excited to be here. And thank you for saying that. I'm certainly lucky to have Mathew in my life. One of the beautiful things we get to do is sort of hold each other accountable to living from that heart-centered place. It really is a commitment that I know that we both have. So it means a lot for you to even say that. So really excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. So I would love to start because so just to give everyone some background, Mathew and Matt, Mathew is the co-founder of a company called Pathy, and Matt is the head of experience at Pathy. And I would love if you guys could kind of just give an overview, whoever wants to, about what Pathy is exactly. And then we'll kind of dive into each of your individual stories, because I think that's such an important part of this.
Thank you, Sydney. Would love to. Pathy is our answer to the modern challenges that many of us face, feeling overwhelmed, stuck, perhaps at the same time, and lonely when it comes to designing the life that we want, especially because many of us were never taught or given the tools, because it really is a skill when it comes to living well and making the positive changes that we want in our life. And not only were we never given those skills or tools, but we don't have the support systems or structures that are necessary for people. We're a social species. We thrive in connection. And so in our hyper-individualistic society that often encourages and celebrates the individual or lone hero or lone wolf that is able to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, Pathy is an answer that provides a space to cultivate those skills and to gain support that feels trusting, inspiring, that promotes accountability in a really healthy way, that allows us to gain the psychological flexibility to create the life that we want, which ultimately leads to well-being. So that's at a very high level what it is. And the way that we're doing that is we're pairing people who are already really committed to making these changes in their life and are open to one-on-one support with a new type of practitioner that we've created that's not quite a coach in the traditional sense. They're definitely not a therapist. They're also not just a friend, but we're taking aspects of all of these amazing modalities that are being shown to improve people's lives. And we've combined that into a practitioner known as a reflector. And what a reflector is doing is they're actually mirroring the brilliance and the genius that our members already contain within, but they're creating a space that in turn allows each member to feel heard, because half the battle is just getting the thoughts out of our head, to feel heard. And then because we train our reflectors in behavior science, they know what questions to ask and they know what structures to create that increase the likelihood of our members being able to take action and feel supported when it comes to making progress in their lives. So we're pairing people with reflectors. It's been a marvelous experiment to witness, and Matt has been playing such an immense role in training our reflectors to really be able to hold this type of space in this really unique way. And so that's how it works at a very high level.
I love that. And, you know, when I was told about Pathy from our mutual friend, Olivia, the words that came out of my mouth were like, I wish I would have had something like this when I started in entrepreneurship, because there's so much of that lone wolf mentality in not just entrepreneurship, but in life in general right now. There's so much solitude. There's so much just hermiting. And it's so important to have, you know, a team behind you, whatever space you're in. If you're a single mom, if you're a teenager, it doesn't matter. Everyone needs a team behind them of people who actually reflect your greatness and help you find it for yourself versus telling you what to do, telling you how to act, telling you how to live. And I just think what you guys are doing is so special and unique and cost effective, which is really amazing in this economy. And Mathew, I would love to hear from you how this came into your sphere. How, you know, what had you come up with this idea? What's your story coming to find Pathy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sydney, for that question. I've been an entrepreneur my whole career as well. So I've experienced a lot of the challenges that come with being my own boss, and whether it's the uncertainty of what to do next in a chaotic world, and then the doubt that we feel on a daily basis in terms of what to do next. I've also faced my own struggles in terms of my own emotional experience and feeling and navigating how uncomfortable that was at times, given the fact that so much of our society sweeps that under the rug and not having healthy spaces to be able to explore that. So what I found is that I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, so to speak. I really stumbled into tech, and I built a product agency where we were working with Fortune 500 brands and startups, bringing their ideas to life. And it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot throughout that experience. But by the time I hit my late 20s, I was really living a life that didn't feel like mine. I was not really fulfilled by the work that I was doing. I was in a dead-end relationship that I knew wasn't going anywhere. And I wasn't really surrounding myself with people that were inspiring me and lifting me up, as opposed to just leaving me in kind of this like state of stuckness and stagnating. And so I actually got really lucky, and I stumbled into a few different types of communities. One was actually a men's emotional, I don't even know what you would call it, like a men's emotional like support group, so to speak.
Cool.
And from there, I was able to start to gain more of a language to understand my own internal experience. And then I was also surrounded by all of these men who were into personal growth and transformation. And they also saw my potential and were willing to hold me accountable to that. Then at the same time, a few of my friends and I, we formed our own little accountability group or pod where we would meet up on a weekly basis and reflect on what did we do this week and what do we want to do next week and how do we hold each other to that. And those two in combination allowed me to start to gain more fluency, and I was able to process a lot of the emotions that I was suppressing. My dad was sick growing up. He had multiple sclerosis, and it had matured me in many ways, but there was so much that I had buried that had also negatively influenced how I was showing up in my life. So I was able to release a lot of that and channel that in really healthy ways. And I saw my life transform. I ended that relationship. I like transformed my friends group and my community. I closed down my company. And from that space, I started to ask myself, what do I really want to do? And I had always been into personal growth. I'm here to see human beings thrive. And we serve for life is one of my own personal mantras. And I got to see how I got off so lucky. So many of my friends at this same point, their late 20s, early 30s, were burning out, depressed, anxious, alone, didn't have anywhere to turn. And so they were asking me, what do I do? I was like, I don't know. But through the skills that I had cultivated in entrepreneurship and whatnot, I had a few frameworks that allowed me to start asking these questions. So I teamed up with my co-founder, Sahil, and we started to ask people what's going on. And we saw the same trend playing out, which is we follow a path that we think will make us happy based on what society tells us we should be doing. We get there, our success catches up to our ambition, and we actually feel wholly unsatisfied that there's so much more to life. But when it comes to actually making these changes, we're terrified. Yeah. We don't know what to do. And even if we do know what to do and what we should do, we don't know how to actually put that into practice, which leads us to doubt ourselves more, to feel even more stuck and isolated in terms of where we are. So we heard this from dozens of people again and again. And something magical happened in these conversations where we would just reflect back what their answers were from the questions that we were asking them. And we saw this trust start to form, and we saw this clarity start to spark. And that was our first breadcrumb to understand that there's really a lot of power in these stories and in these conversations. And that was the first seed for Pathy, which we can, get into and unpack. But the journey of an entrepreneur is extremely challenging. It's something I can deeply relate to, that we can also explore at length from personal experience and also through hearing our members' journeys. So thank you for that.
Wow. I can just feel like the commitment to servant leadership is what I get from you, is this total commitment that like servitude is not beneath you at all. And it's really inspiring, but it's a conversation I've been having so often with people about success, right? You achieve success, but success is not, there's not necessarily correlation between success, fulfillment, and happiness. And if we're always looking for it outside of ourselves, it's like looking for love from men or from women, where it all comes from within, right? Even the idea of fulfillment, all of that has to come from within. It can never come from outside of ourselves. And so many people are coming to find that and coming to realize that just because we have financial success doesn't mean we're fulfilled in our lives. And I think that that's the holy work that you guys are doing at Pathy for sure. So thank you for sharing your story. Matt, I would love to hear the same for you. How did you get started in this, this world? What brought you into this mindset space, Pathy, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a few things I want to, just highlight around the conversation we're having so far that I think would be sort of the sprouts where I would then connect with my story. The big piece is I love that we're highlighting these systems and narratives that we are surrounded by, that so many people today are walking around feeling lonely and scared and are carrying some sense of shame. We're the loneliest human beings that the planet has ever seen. And we know that loneliness is the greatest public health predictor of early mortality. We're neurobiologically hardwired for connection. And when we don't have it, we become desperate for it, or we have to depress the need. And then that leads to all sorts of challenges in our life. And that means so many people are walking around feeling that without narratives that help them understand why and help them normalize that this is actually part of our human experience, that we need connection. And so they're carrying the thing also that perpetuates the trauma, shame, which is the belief that there's something inherently wrong with me. And the beautiful piece that we're highlighting in this conversation is that we are not broken. You are not broken. The people in this world that we see, that we walk by, they are not broken. Our systems are broken. And so broken systems lead to cuts and shards and wounds. And by having more conversations with people about what their experiences are, like Sahil and Mathew did, just talking to them, getting a sense of what are these challenges. Anybody can do that. Go around and just start talking to people and ask them, what do they really want in their life? What are their biggest challenges? And you'll find over and over again, this same sort of dynamic happening where people feel like they have these beliefs that they're carrying that say that they have to abandon their internal world in favor of doing what other people want them to do. And what you'll also find as you dive into the research or you look into stories of anyone throughout history, whenever people build a big, bright, shiny life according to what other people think is important, what they always find over and over again is that it will not lead them to fulfillment if that life is not rooted in what actually matters to them. And we can't get to what matters to us unless we're connected to our inner emotional experience, because our values, those beliefs about what actually matter to us, are things we all carry. They're innate, they're within us. They're the combination of our biology, our lived experiences, and the biography we write about those experiences. And in this world, where so many children go through an education system that intentionally teaches them to suppress their internal experience in favor of performing and producing according to how the person with the most power in the room wants them to behave, of course we have people that grow up and don't know what matters to them. Of course, people feel like the thing they're supposed to do is to produce and perform according to what other people think, so they can have some sense of feeling like they fit in, because our deepest neurobiological need is to connect. And if we think the only way that we can connect is to perform, then of course that's what we're doing. And that's much of what my story was. I grew up as a kid with ADHD who went through a lot of trauma throughout my childhood, and emotional trauma, behavioral trauma, sexual trauma, that then led to me acting out. I felt chaos on the inside, so I caused chaos on the outside. I actually still hold the record for most suspensions ever given to a kid at the elementary school I attended as a kid. And I went through, my teenage years, and I got addicted. I got addicted because I was looking for things to numb anything that was in the way of me playing the persona that I thought I had to, in order to get that little bit of like shallow surface level connection. And I was even trying to convince myself that that was the persona, until eventually it reached a breaking point where I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. And I actually found myself standing over a bridge. I was going to jump, and something pulled me back. And then I walked around and I walked around and I walked around. And that night I decided I needed to at least explore what might it be like if I stopped running from my internal experiences and actually connected with them. And I was ashamed deeply of the person that I had been. I was ashamed of all of these experiences that I felt inside that no one ever taught me how to feel, that I didn't even believe as a man in this society I was allowed to feel. And then I went through hell for about a year, where I went through withdrawal, and I would sleep for about 15 minutes at a time, and I'd wake up in a full panic attack and then have to get myself back to sleep. And for me, I eventually sat up in bed one day and I asked myself, am I going to kill myself? And for me, I said no. And it wasn't because I had a lot of hope about my life. And it wasn't because I felt like there were people who cared about me. I didn't feel connected to anybody. I didn't feel hopeful about anything. I was feeling anxiety and panic every minute of every day for months. and I was sleep deprived, which is one of the most painful and disorienting experiences that a human can go through. I felt like I was observing my life rather than living it. And yet I was lucky because my mom and I, although we sometimes had a tense relationship, I knew in my core, she really wanted me to feel loved. Like she really cared about me, even if I sometimes didn't feel that from her. And when I sat up in bed and asked myself that question, I knew there was at least one person who was trying to care about me. And I couldn't imagine strapping her with the grief. And the thing that I think a lot of us don't understand or see is how many people don't have even that. Even just one person that they can believe is at least trying to care about them. So I was lucky I had that. And so then I asked myself a second question. Okay, so I'm not going to kill myself. Well, if I'm never comfortable again, what is still worth doing with my life?
Mm.
And now my value shifted. Instead of when I was a teenager, my value being cool as my number one value. And then when I was going through withdrawal, my top value becoming comfort. Now my top value became about knowledge. And I learned everything I could about neurobiology, psychology, schools. I was curious. I wanted to know, could I build a school? Could I help understand how organizations and schools are shaped so that kids who walk in with less skills are actually able to still feel a sense of belonging and build those skills? And the next few years of my life became about learning everything I possibly could to do that. And I did. I got an undergrad in philosophy, psychology, and education. I got a master's in counseling. I got extensively trained all around the world in acceptance commitment training and mindfulness. And then I became an elementary school counselor. I started working as a consultant. And when I got into schools, I noticed a really troubling thing, which was a lot of the teachers didn't know how to meet children's needs, and they weren't really open to having any conversation about learning any new science because they felt so unsupported. So we had to transform that culture. And here's where we start to really intersect with Pathy, which is I then had to learn and dove deep into the research and deep into philosophy as I had been for years. And I learned more and more about transforming culture. And what I learned was that in order to transform an organizational culture, which is a shared story of a group of people, we have to go through this process that meets our deepest psychological needs, that empowers us to be able to expand and open and transform. And when you dive deep into the research, when you dive deep into the philosophy, anybody can do this, and you will find these same outcomes, I'm sure of it, because I've talked to experts all over the world. You could listen to my podcast interviews. You'll hear the same themes over and over again, that in order for us to transform as people, we need a relationship-centered process. We are neurobiologically hardwired for connection. Our identity is a relational tool. We need connection with other beings in order to transform, or we at least need to be able to imagine other beings that we can connect with. So a relationship-centered process where we actually focus on the anatomy and science of trust. We need a mindfulness-based structure where structures are created that empower people to connect more deeply with their embodied experience. And we need to clarify through a values-driven process what really matters here, what matters to you, what matters to us. And then I was going through and I was consulting with organizations and schools and for-profit organizations, corporations, leaders, and a mutual friend connected me on a call with Mathew. And Mathew has this like amazing skill of really being able to connect with people instantly and help them feel seen as the person they want to be seen as. And so I'm so thankful. Like when members come to us at Pathy, they get to connect with like who I think is like the perfect person for them to connect with, because Mathew gets to be that first face they connect with, they get to share their story with. And I got that same experience. I got to get on a call with him. We got to just talk about the things we're doing in life. And I saw that what Mathew and Sahil were beginning to create was really incredible. And we discovered really quickly that our vision on the type of impact we want to have in this world was really similar. And we could immediately see how the work that I was doing with organizations and how all of my research in the science and philosophy really connected with what they had discovered through their knowing and through their exploration and their co-creating together. And so then we joined forces and we deepened and expanded the work of what Pathy was doing. And now we are just continuing to build out that community to figure out how can we help more people and how can we empower people who have the skills and the emotional capacity to join us in transforming this world so that people don't have to do this work alone, that our spiritual paths and personal development may be solitary work that is our responsibility, but it's solitary work that we might not have to do alone.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for the vulnerability. I know that, you know, mental health can sometimes be a hard thing to talk about. And even you just opening up about the fact that you were thinking about killing yourself, I think will give so many people permission to be like, oh, I'm not alone if I'm feeling these negative thoughts. I'm not alone if I'm feeling this way. And I think something that I took away from your story, Matt, is the power of being willing to ask yourself tough questions. Like you asked yourself, am I going to kill myself? And the answer was no. And I think that alone, most people just wouldn't be willing to ask themselves that question or ask themselves those deep questions. And that was something that really stood out to me in your story, because the people who are willing to ask themselves the difficult questions are always going to be the ones that move themselves forward until they have other people in their corner that are going to be able to stand for them and ask them those difficult questions as well. I have so many different routes I want to go down with you guys. I think the first one I want to talk about, because I think it's so prevalent, is social media and mental health around social media. Because like you guys mentioned, we're the most disconnected we've ever been. At the same time, we're the most connected we've ever been all the time, always on our phones, always connected to our email, always have our notifications on, right? All of that. But at the same time, we're so bombarded that we don't even know what we want, because there's no space, there's no silence for us to even figure out what we want our lives to look like, what we desire versus what the next door neighbor desires or the other person desires. And so I'd love to ask both of you guys your opinions on like the positives and negatives of social media, but also maybe what people can do to put some boundaries in place in their lives to not let social media and technology completely rock their mental health. Because I know for a lot of people it is.
Yeah, it's real. And what's really beautiful, I think, in how we can really talk about this is Mathew's talking to incoming members about this on a daily basis. People who come in looking for help and support. This is something that we're seeing consistently. People are struggling with. And the piece that I would name is that that's part of these systems that we're in, that it's not an accident, that these technologies are built often with an intention to hijack our attention. I'm forgetting the woman's name, but she worked with a technology company for a long while. And then afterwards she left and she came up with this phrase, which is continuous partial attention, which is the way of relating with the world that these technologies perpetuate sort of on purpose. They're all competing for our attention in this attention economy. And so like, this is not a fault of our wiring as human beings. What we talk about a lot at Pathy is that many of the challenges in our world are the result of systems that were built on a multi-generational ignorance around what human beings need. So we have innovated immensely over these past 100 years. And socially and culturally, we haven't adapted as quickly. And so now we're in this space of, in my view, it's not about villainizing any technology. It's about our relationship with the technology. And when it comes to social media or phones or video conferencing, they're tools. And there are ways to structure them in ways that can deepen trust with people and deepen their safety and empower them by respecting their autonomy and bringing in choice and using what we know about neuroscience to structure things in a way that nourish people. And there are ways to structure these platforms and technologies in ways that manipulate people. And so I would say that there is a part of it, which is like, it's not the technology, it's our relationship to the technology. And I would say there's some parts in how these technologies are created that are not well intentioned, that are rooted in some bit of manipulation. And so I name all of that to say that we're not powerless in this, that we have power in how we relate to these technologies, and with help, by being able to connect together and sort of talk through and navigate through, like, what does it look like for me to relate to these technologies in a healthy way? I think that we really can make all of the technologies and innovations that we have and built within the society, I think we can make them really empowering resources, not just debilitating distractions. But I'd be really curious to see, like, Mathew, like, as you've been talking to members and coming in, and some of those stories, and just some of your thoughts on social media today and how it just challenges us and what we can do.
Yeah, Matt, thank you for that perspective. And I think, Sydney, you mentioned something really powerful around how indexing for success, happiness, and fulfillment don't necessarily equate to one another. And when we're talking about the value system, as Matt's pointing out, social media, in many ways, some of the manipulation and some of the negative aspects are actually manifestations or extensions of those value systems that are rooted in this multi-generational ignorance, that are actually, some of them are actually rooted in a very like natural place for human safety and security. And you can imagine our peers, our parents, their grandparents, at the end of the day, really just wanted financial security to be able to then support for their families and their families and so forth. And so this emphasis on success and how that's played out was reinforced, magnified, to the point where an entire generation, the millennials, namely, now Generation Z, have basically reached a point where we value all of our worth based on our success financially, our reputation, our status, and so forth. And so what gets played out on social media, and is really like, the dial has really been turned to a really intense degree, is this success narrative, to the point where a lot of what gets emphasized is seeing people flexing or advertising their success outwardly. People then reward them for that through likes, shares, and engagement. Other people see that, and it in turn perpetuates this cycle. And like, that's fine. But what we get to do here is offer alternative structures and alternative narratives that it's already happening. You see a ton of these more conscious influencers and people that are advertising or emphasizing what we're talking about: fulfillment, well-being, happiness, that those aren't necessarily a function of success. So the conversations are starting to gain traction. The challenge, in a really interesting study that just came out in the last week or two, is that 70%, I may be misquoting, of people, when they using social media, causes them to feel financially inferior, which makes sense because the most engaging content is yachts and traveling and like really highlighting this beautiful life. So people then feel financially inferior about themselves. Comparison is the thief of joy. But then what's really interesting is that then people find themselves spending money on things through social media that they feel dissatisfied, or that they actually come to regret. So you have these two levers playing out. You have financial and inferiority, and then the need to try and fill that void by paying for stuff. And so that's a layer that we often totally discount or overlook. It's not just that, oh, you're being advertised by algorithms that are trying to target you and modify your behavior, and that are getting really good at that, and they know exactly what to show you. but you're also seeing content that makes you feel even more inferior about the position that you find yourself in.
Right. Right. I don't know if you've ever seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Yeah.
This was one of my favorite conversations to have with people, because our society has become trends and conformity in so many ways. And the way that you get rewarded, like you said, is to conform and to jump on trends. And I find that there's a really dangerous line that we're crossing, because it's kind of pushing a lot of, and again, like you said, Matt, like, it's not all our fault, right? These platforms are smart. They're the people who created these. It's to get you buying things, right? You're either the seller or you're being sold, and there is no in between. And I think that there's this line that's getting crossed where people are living their lives to get that validation from external sources, and that's the only reason they're doing certain things. And that's so dangerous, because people are literally living their lives for other people, and that's the reason so many people don't know what they want. And it's just, I have this conversation with one of my girlfriends all the time, and it's like, this is my question for both of you. How do we, with the power of that and being conscious of it, I'm aware of it, and it's still hard not to conform. So for the people who are starting to awaken to this, like, okay, I don't want to conform, but I still need to build my business online, or, what can people do to reconnect to what is important to them, to remove the conformity, to remove the comparison, to put the blinders on? Like, what are some of those tips that you would give to people who are really, experiencing this kind of danger, I guess, that's coming in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the first piece I think I would bring in is like a deep compassion for ourselves, like not to judge ourselves. I know certainly in my life, there have been times I have bought things or like posted things really driven by this like craving for validation, and like somebody to say like, yeah, I like this, and to get like an ego like boost from that. And that's not because there's something wrong with us or because we're broken. Like, again, our deepest drive to connect, and validation is like a beautiful thing. Somebody saying you're good enough to belong here. We need validation. It's not that we only crave validation if we're sick and broken and weak. We all crave validation. This is not about shaming even validation. And in fact, in this like modern world, we should also take a look at like, why is this happening so much? Well, trust in government's at an all-time low, like attendance at religious institutions at an all-time low. People no longer feel a sense of community with their neighbors and the people they share physical space with. And so we see people becoming like polarized as they only form community with people they share ideas with. And we see people craving community somewhere. I need some sort of symbols. I need some sort of things that can help me feel a sense of community. So what do? Well, now I have all these people on social media, and I can buy things. I can buy things that give me a sense of connection, that validate that my identity aligns with some part of their identity. So I have some sense of connection and community here. That this is actually a really beautiful drive that pushes us to do these things. And so like I would highlight that it's not about shaming this drive within us. It's about understanding that we're seeking out shallow surface comforts for the drive. Like there was this study done in after the Vietnam War. There were a lot of soldiers coming back addicted to opiates, addicted to heroin. And they did these studies where they put this water bottle in this cage with these rats, and they put a regular water bottle, and they did a water bottle with a little bit of heroin, or a little water bottle with a little bit of cocaine. And what they saw was that the rats would constantly overdose on the heroin or the cocaine. And then later, a couple decades later, there was this guy named Bruce Alexander who did these studies and did the exact same study, but then he also created another cage where the rats weren't in isolation with just 2 water bottles, but these rats were in these larger cages that had the regular water bottle and the heroin-laced water bottle, and they had all these different wheels and slides and like things that they could push they had meaning and purpose, and they had connection with other rats. There were other rats in there. They could have intimacy. And what's really beautiful is the rats didn't overdose. In fact, many of them tried the drugs, but then didn't go back, because the drugs are these surface shallow comforts for a need. And that when the deeper need is actually met, the craving for the drug is no longer present. And so rather than even like wrestling with ourselves of like, how do I stop myself from getting into this technology? It's really about, what do you need? Who are you right now? What are you experiencing? What kind of spaces and structures can we give you that help you connect more deeply with yourself, help you get connection with others, so you can clarify more, like, what do you want out of your life that's really based in your embodied experience? And then how do we build that? And as you build that, you won't be going to those surface comforts as much. You won't have the craving, like thinking about, oh my gosh, I need to get back on Instagram. You won't have that. You'll be able to relate in a much healthier way with these technologies. So I think, like, larger philosophical perspective, that's sort of the piece I would say. I know that's not necessarily quick tips, but we can also just trust ourselves that as we invest into identifying what we need and actually building an embodied, full, empowered life, that some of that just starts to fall away because we're being fulfilled.
That study is fascinating.
Right?
What, I'm like blown away. Mathew, do you have anything to elaborate on that? I'm like, this is like one of the best conversations right now. I'm so into this.
Yeah, I would love to. They're not really quick tips, but they're just quick reframes, because we could say, like, here's all the things, but what's really also important to recognize is that when we're going through our day to day, we wake up, we're like, yes, I got this. And then we have our, we go on calls, we have meetings, we work, we're dealing with our family, we're stressed out. Our willpower starts to wane, our reactiveness starts to increase, and become more susceptible to all of these things. And so it's a matter of awareness and creating reminders for ourselves. So I offer a really basic reframe of how, when we enter into social media, is just to look at the names of these companies, right? Instagram. When I think about Instagram now, I think about, this is insta gratification, or I'm getting an insta, like, dose, a gram, literally a gram, a dose of this hit. TikTok. It's like, I don't know what to do with my time. So when we just, when we just like start to look at these things, when we start to, it's really cool. Like, when we just start to like look at them in this way, it empowers us, but then we can actually understand what's going on here. So instant gratification. Our brains, all of the researchers who've studied behavioral science and behavior change talk about how our humans are not great at what's called delayed discounting. We're not great at managing this relationship between instant gratification and delayed gratification. And so we will discount any rewards that come at a delayed rate, even if it's a few seconds or if it's a few minutes. And so there are usually things that are rooted in our values that we know are good for us, whether it's working out, whether it's working on our new business, whether it's calling our parents, whatever it is, calling that friend that we haven't for a while. When our brain looks at the reward that we're going to get, it automatically is doing this calculation that says, this reward's coming later. It's not as easy as actually the instant reward that I would get from staying in bed, not working out, scrolling through social media. So what we can actually do is, one of the things that we can do is actually increase the sense of reward that we would derive to offset that discount that would otherwise be there, by reflecting with ourselves, what is the reward that I would get from getting out of bed and working out? Calling that person, how will I feel? Actually taking one action on my business. So we're doing a bit of this like behavioral hacking. And that what we can also do is change the trigger, make it a little harder for ourselves to just mindlessly open up a social media app, hide it in an obscure folder, delete it from our phone. things that just increase that, and then also increase the positive triggers. So now we're working with the dials to our advantage. We're designing the environments for ourselves. So when we're thinking about, should I go into Insta gratification gram, whatever you want to call it, or TikTok, we have an opportunity to ask ourselves, what other gratification that might be otherwise more rewarding am I actually taking away from myself?
Oh.
And just invite that as a question.
It's such a truth for me. I don't know if you guys are aware of Cal Newport and his work. I read a lot of his books. I read all of them and did a 30-day digital minimalism challenge. It was just that. It was deleting the social media apps, reframing the relationship I have with them, setting different boundaries in place. It doesn't have to be difficult, but it's just like any relationship. Like if we have a relationship with all energy, right? So we have a relationship with people, we have a relationship with money, we have a relationship with social media. And if we don't put work into that relationship, it's going to be like getting a hit of a drug every time. And so I think, just like summing up everything you guys just said, it's like, it takes work and conscious effort, just like any relationship. But it's the awareness around it and the questions. It goes back to the questions we're asking ourselves. This is so much value that you guys are bringing. Thank you so much. What are some of your guys's day-to-day mental health, mental hygiene practices or activities? Because, from hearing both of your stories, you haven't always been like this. You probably haven't always been as grounded as both of you are, and as centered in who you really are and sure, and all of that. I would love to hear, like, on a day-to-day, what keeps your emotional hygiene in check?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think there's two pieces of this for me. Like there are some practices that are staples in what I do. And there's also like this meta aspect even of answering that question, which is, how do I decide what my practices are? Because there have been times in my life where I've been like, okay, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to journal. And that's because all of these other people who I respect and are living in a way that I admire say that I should do that, and I'm going to do it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. And then there's this like other space that starts to open up, which is, what do I actually need? Like, rather than trusting what other people say that I should do, can I try enough things and be really open and honest as I'm going through there, so that I can see how that impacts me, not over one day, but like over an okay sample size. And so like I've done that enough where now like I've got some solid information of like what these different practices do for my individual body. So there are some that I do every single day, and then there are some that it's really like on an as needed basis. For me, I meditate daily. And it used to be like this rigid, like discipline thing. Like I needed to like discipline my attention almost. Like that's what it was. Like I needed to wrangle it up every morning and make sure it would do what I wanted it to do. And that used to be what my meditation practice was all about. But really, my meditation practice is about spending some loving time with myself. Can I bask my inner experience with my own loving attention before I go spend my loving attention everywhere else during the day? Like, can I just give myself some of that? Can I like give myself some validation? And so like I start my day always with some sort of meditation practice. And then Mathew knows this. I am at my best when I meditate and I do some writing to start my day. Like when I don't write, like people in my life hear about it. I'm like, man, I didn't write this morning, and I feel like it's like eating away at me. Like there's this, it's like I'm like carrying it. And so I like to meditate every morning and write every morning. And then other things that sometimes come into my practice is I really love walking meditations, walking around, sometimes listening to music, sometimes just being there. I love singing. And sometimes that is legitimately my morning practice, where I will meditate and I'll get outside, I'll sing and I'll drum. But for me, really important ones are meditating and writing. And then in an ideal day, I'm also working out, some sort of activity to just get the dopamine going. Ideally, I'm getting outside as I'm exercising. But I know for me, my real anchors are meditating and writing.
Yes. And like you said, it might start as a discipline for some people listening. Like it might start as you got to kind of push yourself to do it in the morning and build that discipline. But once you know how it makes you feel over a sustained period of time, it becomes a necessity, and it becomes like you crave it because you know what's on the other side if you don't. And I think that's a really powerful point that you made. It's self-love. It's a form of self-love, not self-hate. And forcing yourself to do anything, it's a gift. And if it's the only time you have during the day, if you're a busy mom, if you've got a lot going on, you're building a business and you never put yourself first, and if you can do just those few easy things that don't cost any money and take probably 30 minutes, I mean, it can change your entire life, I think. Mathew, what about yourself?
Yeah, there's so much here, and I can relate with everything that both of you are saying. A few things come up. The first is what you just said, that self-care is self-love. Because when we take care of ourselves, we're actually giving ourselves evidence that we are worthwhile, as opposed to doing everything for everybody else. And then we're actually sending a signal, I'm not worth it. So when we actually flip that equation and focus on ourselves, it's no surprise that our business starts to thrive, our clients treat us better, our relationships start to thrive, because we're sending that signal to ourselves, and we start to believe it even more so. If any of your listeners are hearing about these practices and then they think to themselves, I start things and then, I fizzle out after a few days or after a few weeks. What the next thought that we often have is, oh, I'm really good at planning what I'm going to do, but then I never actually follow through. I suck at that. One of the meta practices that I think myself and because I'm not perfect, right? I have weeks where I'm not meditating, I'm not working out, I'm not doing all these things. The meta practice that I've really been conscious about is that period when I fall off, how do I relate with it? So many of ourselves, when that happens, we beat ourselves up, we then feel stuck, we doubt ourselves, we lose confidence. It's actually, that moment is one that we really need to celebrate as a society within our communities, because you can't fall off unless you've stepped up.
Okay.
Say it one more time. Play
Say
it back.
one more time for everybody.
Play it back.
We can't fall off unless we've stepped up, unless we've made progress. And that moment when we fall off is actually one that if we can reframe and celebrate, then that's an opportunity for us to be like, all right, I've fallen off, and this is a new opportunity for me to get back and snap forward, to spiral upward. That is the richest moment in the personal growth journey, because that moment is not only natural, it's inevitable. There are going to be other things that throw us off. So I really want to celebrate that. And I'll say, I didn't meditate for it felt like a month or two, and I was anxious every day and I was feeling it. And when I got back to my practice, it reinforced for me how important that was. And that relationship, I haven't meditated in 3 or 4 days now, but I know how important it is to me. And I know that I'm not going to, that period of falling off is going to be shorter. It's going to be less painful, and I can prioritize the things that matter to me. So that in and of itself is a practice. Meditation, I call that, I believe it's the ultimate delay of gratification, right? Until you reach a point that Matt's talking about where you can actually feel that intrinsic self-love, you're literally putting all of the stimulation. You're actually foregoing all of that stimulation. And I found that when I meditate and I slow down, that the moment I sit up, I'm more present to all of life. Actually, everything after when I sit becomes more gratifying. I can enjoy it more thoroughly and more presently. And meditation is also a beautiful practice because it helps us overcome the impulsivity and that tendency towards instant gratification with all the other things. It's a cornerstone habit that helps us then go work out and go do all of the other things. And working out is another one that is just like that, because I read a study yesterday about strength training, how just the act of pushing, literally pushing a weight and doing something that isn't comfortable helps us reframe that not only are we capable of doing those things, but our body, which we often so forget about, is capable of doing these difficult things that allow us to then take a more embodied approach. So an ideal day for me actually starts in the evening, where I consciously wind down and I'm not just doom scrolling on Reddit, which is my gratification of choice, but I'm winding down consciously. I'm going to bed early so that today I get to wake up early, more consciously. I get to do the things that I want to do more proactively, which starts to feed into a virtuous cycle whereby throughout the day, if I can find time for a workout, if I can find time to meditate, and then invest all of that, energy into my relationships, into my work, into myself, everything just feels more fulfilling.
Yeah. So true. There's so much to meditate, and it doesn't have to be a long time. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 1 minute. 1 minute of mindfulness can change the entire day. And I'll say just like you guys have shared, that I was kind of off my meditation game last week, and I was like, this morning I'm going to do a meditation. And just like Mathew, like you said, I opened my eyes and like all morning, I was just a little more grateful. I was just a little bit more clear. I was just a little bit less distracted with my phone. And it's just those little compound things. And the relationship that you have with just getting back on the wagon, like, hey, it's okay if I missed a day. It's all good. Like there's tomorrow. Yeah. And I think that's where people get so caught up in this perfection. And if you've ever heard that, they say like, if you had $84,000 in the day and someone took 10 of them away, would you throw the rest of the money away? It's the same with the seconds of the day, right? It's like, if you don't meditate or you don't journal, it's like, are you really going to make yourself feel bad for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 days and throw that all away? Or are you just going to like shift, be okay with it and move on with your life? Because the self beat up doesn't do much.
Well, it doesn't do much. And similar to like, even like the dynamic Mathew was talking about of like his meta practice of catching himself when he falls off, like that is also a meditation. That like meditation can seem like it can be a really vulnerable practice for some people, and important to highlight, like, of course it does, because our systems don't nurture that way of relating and don't normalize that and teach us how to do it. And so it can feel really scary. So a few like things just highlight there, which is for anybody listening, maybe that doesn't have a meditation practice or hasn't really deeply explored mindfulness. Mindfulness doesn't have to be stillness, for one. And mindfulness and meditation don't mean clearing your mind. Mindfulness meditation is a self-awareness practice that sometimes helps us feel calmer, but really it's about attending to what we're experiencing. So it's not just having like an energetic drain in the background, but we can actually see what's here. And then things can sometimes start to settle. And what's really beautiful about that is meditation is essentially like 4 prongs on a wheel. So the top of the wheel is you set an intention. And maybe my intention is I'm going to sit there and I'm going to focus on my breathing. And then the next prong on the wheel is that a distraction comes up, because that's how our minds work. Our minds are here to help us stay safe. That's what they evolved for. And so our mind likes to scan for dangers. Our mind likes to review other past dangers. And what's our deepest neurobiological need? To connect. So maybe a distraction that comes up is I say, why did I say that silly thing in conversation last week? Or, oh, why did I wear that shirt yesterday? Like we can be really harsh and critical on ourselves. And that might be a distraction that comes up. Or maybe it's, oh, I need to go to the grocery store later. And I want to make sure that I get bananas that are a little bit more green this time. And then the third prong on the wheel is just like noticing. Oh, just notice the distraction. Oh, there I am. Like I've just like fallen off. What was I paying attention to? And then the fourth prong is releasing the distraction and returning back to the intention. Oh yeah, I'm just bringing back to my breath. Oh, my breath. And what we know is actually, just like Mathew said, you can't fall off unless you've stepped up. That stepping back up is actually where we rebuild the synapses. That's where we're strengthening that synapse right there. So falling off is actually this amazing opportunity when you've caught yourself falling off in a meditation practice, and then you're catching yourself and going back to your intention. That's where you're actually strengthening the attention. That's the rep. That's the rep you're putting in. And so that's a really beautiful thing to celebrate. And so whether it's our relationship with ourselves internally and like how we're thinking about things, catching ourselves when we fall off, celebrating that rather than shaming ourselves and returning back to our intention. Or if it's like some practice that we're doing, some habit that we're building, and we've fallen off, celebrating ourselves and returning back to that intention.
So that right there speaks to what I feel a lot of us struggle with, which is actually celebrating ourselves versus the norm, which is to be our worst inner critic, beat ourselves up, negative self-talk, you name it. And so what meditation does is it clears a lot of the variables, and it creates an easier space. For some people, it's a lot harder and more intimidating, but ideally an easier space to do this work and to go through those loops. What a lot of people then are turned off by is like having to actually sit down with all of their thoughts and to be there with them. And I forgot, one of the recent practices that I've integrated into my own life is I have my own reflector now. And as an external processor, having someone that I can share what are the thoughts that I'm having internally, what are the ideas that I have for my own life, reflecting on my experiences is almost taking the loop that Matt's talking about. Like, what's that intention that I have? Where am I falling off with it? And bringing it into the real world. So one of the ways that I've articulated that is like many cases we might be MIA in our own lives, right? We're missing an action. We're going through the motions, but we're not really present. What this practice of actually creating a space with another, I say it's almost like we become MIA, mindfulness in action. We can bring mindfulness into our day-to-day life by setting an intention of, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to show up. And then afterwards reflecting on, this is how it went. This is what I was able to accomplish, or this is where I fell off, and actually reframing that I failed narrative to, this is what I get to learn from this experience. So having somebody in our corner that in some ways can help us model being kinder to ourselves, and we might otherwise be able to do so alone, is an X factor in so many ways for how we communicate with ourselves, that already levels the playing field that we might all be struggling with alone, just because of how much negativity we've internalized.
Oh yeah. And like you said, you're an external processor, right? Which is like, you got to be able to talk to, I know when I can talk to my friends, right? 100%. It's great, but my friends don't want me unloading on them all the time.
Exactly.
Okay? Let's pay somebody for that. And
Right.
And that's what it's about. That's what you guys are doing. And it's truly, it's very rare that I'm like all in on what people are doing, because I believe in it so much without having experienced it firsthand myself. But I know that what you two are doing with Pathy it's critical, like in a real way. It is critical to mental health. It is critical to emotional health for people. And I'm just so glad that you guys have decided to step into this and like do something that's really going to change where the world is going. It's such a gift. Such a gift. Yeah. So my question for you guys, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I feel like we could talk about anything, like anything's on the table, which is so great. And so maybe I'll have you guys on again at some point, but I would love to hear, and you can speak in, terms of Pathy or the world, what is each of your visions for your future or the future? Like, what would you love to see happen in this world while you're alive that you can maybe make an impact or a dent in?
Well, it's funny because we talk about this constantly, right? We talk about from a business perspective, and we're really committed to not building a business just from our cognition, but also making sure that we prioritize our intuition. And that means we can't just commit to a vision and build, that it's a constant relationship. Like, we constantly have to be checking in, like, what feels true to us? What's exciting us right now? What are we noticing? How is this impacting our vision? So we talk about this a lot. So I'm excited for us to just kind of talk about this here now. I know for me, I see a world where people have more options of how they can more deeply connect with themselves without feeling like they have to totally isolate themselves in order to do it. I see a world where we can transform our school systems, our workplaces, our families, our relationships by having more of those trusting spaces where we can show up as our whole selves, be celebrated for the person that we are, and just get a little bit of help clarifying what really matters to us and making changes that help us feel more full in our life. And I see us doing that with reflectors. I see us building a community of people who unite around a shared mission and can support one another, support each other's development as we then support members. I see us building a membership base that has this like rippling, trickling out effect of just being able to all really buy into the belief that every interaction with another human being is an opportunity for impact, and just empowering people with this ability to connect more deeply with themselves and to be open to connection with others and to transform our world, not by needing to sit together as like one person and to create a master architected plan, but to understand we're now in this phase in our society where if we can connect together and create more trusting spaces where we can empower one another, then we'll be more powerful than any broken systems that aren't serving us, that are built upon a foundation of mistrust. And by just buying into that if we can come together and really build trusting spaces, we can transform places and things. And I could get more specific as to what it looks like, but that's really the impact that I see us having at Pathy, that I hope I continue to have with the work that we do.
So beautiful. Mathew?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's beautiful to hear and to just continue to like re-inspire. What I envision is a world where people are coming together around a shared value to support one another to thrive. That we're getting back to our roots as human beings of supporting one another in a very, in many ways, it's very simple. That for hundreds of thousands of years, we've thrived in community, as a village, as a tribe, being there with each other through our struggles and challenges. And sometimes it's just creating the spaces to listen to one another and to feel seen and heard in that is all we need to gain the clarity that we already have inside to know what we need to do. So whether you call that making self-discovery more of a shared activity, making personal growth collaborative, whether I've heard it articulated as a listening society that really listens to the need of each individual, that empowers our psychological growth and our emotional development, and creating a place that anyone, anywhere that wants to step into a life that feels truer to them, that reflects who they are, that allows them to even explore that as an alternative to what feels socially conformative, like we've been talking about all along, that they can actually start to look inward and grow inwardly, that we can all develop this skill of inwardness as opposed to all this external seeking, that we have that space that you, whenever you think about it, you can go there and you can feel connected to others that are exploring these things that you can feel connected with. That's the dream, that none of us, that we don't have to get lucky when it comes to stumbling into these types of spaces, that we don't have to lie there in bed alone asking ourselves the questions that Matt had to ask himself, and to feel like there's no one else here that I can relate to, or that I only have one person, but to really unlock what I think all of us that's bubbling inside for all of us. Really put this flag up there and say, like, let's do this together. That's the dream, and that's what we're striving to work towards every day, and that's what we're seeing people show up and support the cause.
So beautiful. It's, it's oneness. It is enlightenment at its finest is what I hear you sharing. And I think it's a time, and you guys are really facilitating it in a beautiful way of like taking off the masks and removing a little bit of the ego, or I like to call it the wanter, because it's always wanting something, always wanting something new. And like you said, you have to go within. And I always think of the quote, like, if you don't go within, you go without. And what y'all are doing with, Pathy and the reflectors is holding safe space for people. And what that means to me is holding a space with no agenda and just creating a space where people can come safely. They can talk about anything without judgment. And if we can do that with each other within Pathy or outside of Pathy with our friends or with our family members or just strangers, with no agenda or expectation of people being a certain way that you expect them to be, it's going to make all of our lives so much better. And you guys are creating a culture of oneness. That's what my experience is of this. And it's so beautiful. And I'm just so honored to even have had this conversation with you two today, because I'm just blown away by who you both show up as, and it's inspiring to me in no other way. So if you can, I would love if you guys could both share where people can find you, how they can get involved with Pathy, what that looks like, and then I'll obviously include everything in the show notes below as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sydney. And just thank you for reflecting that back to us, this culture of oneness, and how we can rewrite the narrative that doesn't just accept separation and division as the norm. So for anyone who's interested, our website is findpathly.com. And there you'll be able to learn more about what we do. You'll also, if you're interested, you'll be able to apply to become a member or even a reflector, which is on the page. And from there, we have a quick form that already starts to ask questions that activates our genius. What's most important to us? How confident do we feel? What might be in the way? And from there, if people are inclined, or if we see that there's a fit, they're invited to actually share in a conversation that is really focused on exactly what you said, creating that space for them to share their story, what's most important for them, where do they want to go, and to have that reflected back to them out the gate. And if that feels empowering, if that feels valuable, they can then explore if there's a fit in terms of Pathy to learn more about what it is and how it can serve them, whether that's with myself or one of the members from our team, that they can use, that people already walk out of with a ton of clarity just from that initial conversation. And then from there, we've had so many incredible people apply to become reflectors. The reflectors that Matt and the team have been training are absolutely wonderful human beings that inspire us on a daily basis. We then, based on somebody's goals and preferences, we match them with a reflector. We share the match with them, and thus their journey begins, where they have a check-in call. It's only 30 minutes, and that's because all of us don't have time for an hour-long, 90-minute call, whatever it is, but it's 30 minutes at a frequency that they find most valuable, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, you name it. And then the coolest thing, and one of the biggest points of difference, is that it doesn't just end with that call, because so many of us have had an amazing call and then we show up a week or 2 weeks, a month, a year later, and we didn't actually do anything based on that. And so what their reflector does is they actually create a space to message between those check-in calls, where they're sharing reminders, nudges, checking in on how things went, giving a space where they can process the challenges that might be arising in their week. And this has been shown to increase accountability. What we're seeing is that this is actually one of the aspects that increases the likelihood of action, which is so critical. So that's where they can find us, and that's how it goes. And we're then checking in throughout the journey to make sure they're finding value throughout. And if they're not, doing whatever we can in our power to just continuously refine as we all learn together, what does it mean to empower humans to support one another?
Amazing.
Yeah, and Sydney, just want to highlight, so much gratitude for having us on. Just like in the last conversation I had with you, a ton of fun. And I can say that at Pathy, we're really just grateful and excited to be in community with you, and really honor the work that you're doing to really consistently just show up in the way that you do. Talking about sure, goal setting and how do you optimize what you're doing throughout your weeks, that you're being effective and doing that in a way that's really grounded in the human experience, and talking about well-being and how all those things are connected. So thank you for consistently leaning into that authenticity with the people that you support, who work with you, and anyone who just follows you. And we're thankful to be welcomed into that space. And in the same vein, if anybody's been listening to this and this resonates with you, we want to connect with you too. So you can connect with us also on social media at Find Pathy. If you are drawn to becoming a member, like, we're excited to hear your story and hope you do apply through the website. If you're feeling like you have some of these skills, maybe you're a coach, maybe you're a therapist, maybe you're just somebody who's always been a good listener, and you have some open emotional capacity and you'd like to be part of this work, you want to apply to become a reflector, amazing. Like, we want to hear your story too. And we just thank you all for listening. And Sydney, thanks again for having us.
Thank you guys so much.